If you're dying to see what happens next and want to stay 5 episodes ahead in this series and others, then why wait? Join our awesome community of over 500 members on Patreon, where they're already enjoying the latest episodes right now for as little as $2.50 for your first month. So what are you waiting for? Hop over to Patreon after this video and get exclusive early access. With that said, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the page, and I'll see you in the next one. Using his cloud skipping technique, Brohan tore through the vastness of space in mere seconds. The technique, a fusion of speed and teleportation, was notoriously taxing on stamina. Had Broly attempted it alone, it would have drained him in an instant. However, thanks to the fusion with Gohan, their combined power made the energy loss negligible. Their destination? The Tournament of the Gods, a battlefield unlike any other. As Brohan materialized onto the floating cosmic arena, his burning golden aura crackled with sheer intensity, sending shockwaves rippling through the very fabric of reality. The moment his boots touched the ground, his sharp Saiyan instincts kicked in. His gaze locked onto a figure standing before him. Zarama, the first mortal, the primordial being created by Zeno-sama himself, had just arrived. Yet, as he turned to face Brohan, a flicker of confusion crossed his otherwise unreadable expression. What? Zarama's voice carried an air of disbelief. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that no being could follow him through his dimensional rift. Yet here, Brohan stood, staring him down with fiery, battle-hardened eyes. Brohan's muscles tensed, his rage boiled to the surface, his mind flashing back to a single haunting memory. The moment Zarama killed Gohan in a previous battle. The pain, the helplessness, the cold void of death. His jaw clenched, and his voice came out low and seething. Don't think I'll let you get away again. That wasn't just Brohan speaking. That was Gohan, the lingering remnants of his former self, the unrelenting spirit of a warrior who had been robbed of his future. Zarama smirked, folding his arms across his chest. Foolish mortal, he scoffed, his voice laced with condescension. It seems you have no idea who you're dealing with. Allow me to enlighten you. The air around him distorted as his divine energy fluctuated, warping the very space-time fabric around them. I am Zarama, the first mortal, created by Zeno-sama himself, an immortal being. I cannot be killed. I cannot be harmed. A sinister chuckle escaped his lips as he looked down at Brohan, his eyes filled with arrogance. But Brohan didn't care. Words meant nothing to him anymore. Actions spoke louder. Before Zarama could continue his monologue, Brohan moved. A mere step turned into a sprint, a golden streak of lightning tearing across the battlefield in a blur. Super Saiyan 6 Wukong Brohan had no interest in banter. His body surged with a force beyond comprehension, his aura burning hotter than 10 Earth suns. Every cell in his body screamed for vengeance. 5 minutes, Brohan muttered to himself. That's all the time I've got. If I can't end this now. He shook the thought away. There was no room for doubt. Zarama smirked, raising a hand in invitation. Come, Saiyan. He had planned to stall for time. After all, he had just absorbed the Grand Priest, a feat thought impossible. The sheer magnitude of his new power required time. Time to adjust, to harness, to control. That was why he fled after the absorption. But now, with Brohan charging toward him, he had no choice but to fight. The moment Zarama blinked, Brohan was already upon him. A planet-shattering punch erupted from Brohan's fist, the force behind it enough to shatter moons and split atmospheres. The air itself ignited in flames from the sheer heat of his energy. Steam hissed from his knuckles, his golden aura blazing like a divine inferno. Zarama, unfazed, raised his palm to intercept the blow. He had predicted this. He had anticipated shutting down the attack with minimal effort. But reality had other plans. Boom! The moment Brohan's fist connected, Zarama was blasted backward like a bullet from a gun. His body rocketed through the air, his smirk vanishing as pure shock overtook his features. He hadn't just been hit, he had been overpowered. What? He roared, his voice filled with disbelief. Impossible. Brohan didn't give him a second to recover. He vanished, disappearing in a flicker of speed before reappearing mid-air, just above Zarama's tumbling form. His hands were already moving, forming a barrage of rapid key punches. His fists became a blur, each strike exploding like nuclear warheads upon impact. Every punch carried the force of a collapsing star, sending shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. Zarama barely managed to weave through the onslaught, blocking where he could, but the sheer speed, the ferocity, was overwhelming. Brohan's leg shot forward. A devastating roundhouse kick connected with Zarama's ribs, sending him spiraling downward. The moment his body hit the ground, the entire arena shook, cracks webbing across its surface as debris erupted into the air. Yet, as the dust settled, a low chuckle echoed from the crater. Zarama slowly rose to his feet, wiping a trickle of golden ichor from his lip. His smirk returned, but his eyes had changed. Zarama was struggling to comprehend it. His power was vast, unfathomable. He had absorbed the god of destruction Belmod, the primordial demon, God Azazel, and even the Grand Priest himself. The culmination of their energy coursed through him, making him stronger than almost any being in existence. And yet, Brohan overpowered him. It wasn't just strength, it was something beyond strength. The fusion warrior was wielding 50% of Wukong's power, the absolute limit of what his mortal body could handle. But that alone wasn't what made him terrifying. It was the synergy, the unstoppable combination of Broly's brute force, Gohan's beast-like precision, and the Super Saiyan 6 Wukong form blended with Beast Kaioken. Every ounce of his energy was pushed to its peak. This was the strongest he had ever been. With each step Brohan took, the ground beneath him melted into molten rivers. The sheer intensity of his aura disintegrated all life that had once thrived on the planet. Wildlife, creatures, vegetation, erased in an instant. If not for Brohan's strict control, the very planet itself would have been reduced to ashes. At this moment, he was a god in a mortal body. Zarama clenched the air itself, using sheer will to halt his momentum. His mind sharpened, readying for his counterattack. But before he could make a move, wham! A backhand strike from Brohan cracked through space-time itself. Zarama's body was flung downward, spiraling out of control. His form became a blur of golden light as he collided with the battlefield, shattering the foundation of the arena. Before he could even react, Brohan was already there. The fusion warrior dropped from the sky like a meteor, his aura a blazing sun, his silhouette almost impossible to distinguish in the golden flames. The beating began. A barrage of 1,000 consecutive Kai-infused strikes detonated against Zarama's body. Each impact sent shockwaves rippling through the multiverse. Every punch carried the force to obliterate entire solar systems. And yet Brohan wasn't holding back. Boom, boom, boom. Each strike felt like an unstoppable tidal wave, crashing down with such force that the tournament of the gods arena, the same arena that had withstood Ultra Instinct Goku versus Jiren, was collapsing under the pressure. The battle had gone beyond the battlefield itself. Chunks of the tournament ring splintered into the cosmos, the warriors now fully fighting in open space. But Brohan didn't care. Thanks to Gohan's mastery of ki, he could breathe and move freely even in the vacuum of space. Meanwhile, Zarama's body was reeling, struggling to comprehend what was happening. Impossible! He gasped, barely able to form words as blood poured from his mouth. The once proud first mortal, the so-called immortal being, was in pain, real pain. His mind raced. I am immortal. How can I, Zarama, be taking damage? Why do his attacks hurt so much? Brohan's breathing was controlled, calm, his eyes burning with golden fire, locked onto Zarama like a predator watching its prey. Your problem is simple, Brohan growled, his voice a mix of Broly's raw aggression and Gohan's razor-sharp focus. You've spent too long hiding behind borrowed power. Zarama hovered in space, his body twitching as he wiped away a streak of glowing violet blood from the corner of his mouth. Around him, the remains of the tournament drifted in the void, pieces of molten rock and debris floating in weightless suspension. His red eyes, once filled with arrogance, now burned with something else. Disbelief. Fury. For the first time in millennia, he felt true pain. The same pain he had once experienced when Zeno-sama defeated him eons ago. His immortality, it wasn't the absolute kind. Unlike the Grand Priest, whose body could regenerate limitlessly, Zarama's form fell under a different category of immortality. His life wasn't tied to an endless healing factor. Instead, his His immortality was dependent on ancient relics and rituals, the very same relic he had used to absorb the essence of countless divine beings. That was the key, and he knew it. "I need more time," Zarama whispered, his voice strained. If only he had more time to fully hone the Grand Priest's essence. If only he could fully assimilate the power. Then he would be untouchable. Brohan floated in the void of space, his golden aura burning so intensely that it eclipsed the distant stars. The sheer energy radiating from his body warped reality itself, sending distorted ripples through the cosmos. His chest rose and fell in measured breaths, his massive frame coiled like a spring, ready to strike. His heterochromatic eyes, one black, the other emerald green, locked onto Zarama with unyielding intensity. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to move, to attack, to finish this fight before the fusion ran out. 3 minutes. That was all the time he had left. 3 minutes to put an end to a being who had lived for eons. But Zarama, the so-called first mortal, still stood, his lips curled into a disdainful sneer, his crimson aura flickering with unstable power. Around him, the shattered remnants of the Tournament of the Gods trembled under the weight of his fury. He clenched his fists, and instantly, chunks of broken arena imploded into dust, disintegrated by the sheer force of his grip. "Not bad for a Saiyan, and a fused one at that," Zarama spat, his deep voice cutting through the void, as if space itself carried his words. Brohan didn't respond. His expression remained unreadable, but his body was a coiled weapon, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Yet, something in Zarama's gaze shifted, a flicker of recognition, a glint of puzzlement. He had been watching the Saiyans from the shadows, lurking in the background of reality while observing the Grand Priest. He had studied them, analyzed them, measured their power, and yet something about Brohan unsettled him. He had seen this face before, or at least a part of it. For a moment, the god's mind flashed back to a battle long past, one where he had erased Gohan from existence, a battle that should never have been undone. And yet, here he was, alive, whole, as if that event had never happened. Zarama's mind twisted in confusion. He was before the age of Dragon Balls, before their creation. He had no knowledge of their powers, of their ability to defy the very laws of existence. But even now, his pride refused to bend. He scoffed, his red eyes gleaming as his energy began to swirl around him like an unstable storm. "It doesn't matter." A sinister grin spread across his lips as he straightened his posture, shaking off his wounds. "You've only tasted a fraction of my true power." Despite his confidence, doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. How is this Saiyan abomination this strong? Zarama was immortal, a being created by Zeno-sama himself. He had absorbed the power of the Grand Priest, the gods of destruction, and countless others. He should be untouchable, and yet Brohan had hurt him. Badly. Zarama's crimson aura flared wildly as he clenched his fists, recalling the countless beings he had consumed throughout his existence, the gods he had devoured, the warriors he had crushed, the absolute power he had gathered for millennia. All of it for one goal, his ultimate ambition, his true purpose. He would kill Zeno. And Brohan, he was just another obstacle, a stepping stone on his path to vengeance. His muscles tensed, his aura spiking violently, causing the fabric of space to bend and distort around him. His voice, now laced with malice, rang through the battlefield like a death sentence. "I will have my revenge," Zarama declared, his glare locking onto Brohan with newfound intensity. A dark smile crept onto his face. "You're just a stepping stone in my way." Brohan narrowed his eyes. Zarama was bluffing. He could see it, the way Zarama carried himself, the false bravado in his voice. He was trying to buy time. But time was something Brohan didn't have to spare. His grip tightened into a fist as his voice rumbled through the void, shaking the very fabric of space. "No more running, Zarama." Brohan's tone was absolute, filled with finality. "I'll end you here and now." His stance shifted. One hand curled into a tight fist beside his face. His center of gravity lowered. It was Piccolo's stance, one that had been drilled into Gohan through years of training. But Brohan was not just Gohan. The raw, unchained savagery of Broly coursed through him as well. A perfect balance. Disciplined technique, fused with berserker power. Golden Ki swirled violently around him, outlining a spectral great ape behind his figure. The Wukong spirit roared, silent yet deafening, its sheer presence distorting reality as it emerged from his Super Saiyan 6 aura. And then, he moved. A furious battle cry erupted from his throat as he vanished, his body moving so fast it appeared as if he had blinked out of existence. Zarama barely had time to react. A violent shockwave tore through the cosmos as Brohan's axe kick came crashing down from above. Boom! Zarama barely managed to cross his arms in time, intercepting the devastating blow. The moment their bodies collided, space-time itself wavered like shattered glass. Stars in the far reaches of the universe flickered unnaturally, their light bending under the sheer force of impact. Zarama grunted. Even blocking, the force of the kick sent tremors through his entire being, forcing him downward against his will, but he adapted instantly. Flipping in mid-space, he twisted his body, using the momentum to launch himself forward. His crimson aura flared like a wildfire, his eyes burning with defiance. He thrust his palm forward, aiming to obliterate Brohan with a single blast. But then, something happened. A streak of burning violet light pierced through the void, heading straight for Zarama, a special beam cannon. Zarama's instincts screamed at him. He hadn't sensed it at all. It had come out of nowhere. With milliseconds to react, he snapped his palm outward, firing a blast of his own to intercept the attack. Boom! The universe trembled. A tidal wave of raw energy exploded outward, shaking the heavens. The two attacks collided in a dazzling display of power. But Zarama was losing ground. His blast was being pushed back. His eyes widened in disbelief. Impossible. His voice came out in a snarl. What is this? Who dares? And then he saw him, a lone warrior, standing firm at the other end of the attack, Piccolo. But this was no ordinary Piccolo. His body radiated with divine energy, his form towering and bathed in a radiant golden green aura. His once dark skin had taken on an ethereal glow, and his eyes burned with unmatched wisdom and power. Zarama felt something he had never expected to feel, a sense of unease. Because this Namekian's power, it was beyond comprehension. Zarama's frustration erupted into a roar, his energy spiking violently as he tried to pour more force into his attack. For a brief moment, he started to push back against the special beam cannon, but it didn't last. Just as quickly, he fell back into the struggle. He gritted his teeth. No, this can't be happening. I am the first mortal, the true god. But it was happening. Piccolo was unlike anything the universe had ever seen. He had fused with all the eternal dragons, even Super Shenron. This was no ordinary fusion. This was ascension. He had transcended gods. And now, standing before them, he had taken on a form never seen before. A new deity among mortals. Piccolo had achieved something that defied all logic. A true god form. I am God Piccolo, the Namekian said, his deep voice echoing through the cosmos. His piercing gaze locked onto Zarama, radiating an aura of absolute dominance. The battlefield had changed. Brohan stood frozen, his heterochromatic eyes wide in disbelief. His body was still surging with the overwhelming power of Super Saiyan 6 Wukong, his fusion at its absolute peak. Yet, in that moment, something else had completely stolen his focus. The golden green figure before him radiated an unimaginable presence. The sheer pressure of his energy spread across the stars like a celestial explosion, its power washing over the entire dimension. Every molecule in Brohan's body screamed, telling him that what he was feeling was beyond godhood. His voice cracked with shock. Is that really Piccolo? The words left his lips before he could stop them. His hands clenched into trembling fists as he struggled to grasp the impossible. How? Just yesterday, Broly had met Piccolo. Back then, the Namekian was powerful, sure, but nothing like this. Yet, here he stood, transcended. His energy wasn't just powerful, it wasn't just godly. It was limitless. Brohan's dual voices, a fusion of Broly's primal instincts and Gohan's sharp intellect, finally pieced it together. Did he fuse with more eternal dragons? Brohan muttered. A chilling realization struck him. Before Brohan had come into existence, Broly had witnessed Piccolo fuse with two eternal dragons. First, Shenron, transforming into Orange Piccolo. Then, Porunga, achieving a form that had been called Omega Piccolo. But now, Brohan's Gohan side remembered something crucial: Super Shenron, the golden dragon that granted Android 17's wish after the Tournament of Power, the most powerful of them all. A wave of understanding hit him like a tidal wave. Did he fuse with Super Shenron? His voice barely came out as a whisper. Light years away, in a realm beyond mortal understanding, the battlefield where Omni, Gogeta, and Raiko clashed fell into complete silence. The moment God Piccolo revealed himself, his power spread like cosmic dust, scattering across the infinite void. It tore through dimensions, stretching beyond the known multiverse, forcing all who could feel energy to stop and acknowledge its existence. For one warrior, this feeling was far too familiar. A sharp inhale, eyes widened in pure shock. Gogeta took a step forward, his own burning aura flickering violently. Trying to process what he had just sensed, his voice erupted, carrying across the battlefield like a meteor crashing into a planet. Piccolo? It wasn't a question. It was disbelief. His mind was screaming at him, telling him it was impossible, but his heart told him otherwise. He clenched his fists, his body trembling, not from fear, but from something he hadn't felt in ages: hope. How is this possible? Gogeta whispered, his golden brows furrowing. His power, I can't even sense the end of it. A being of his level should be able to detect limits, to understand the walls of another warrior's power. But God Piccolo had no walls, no limits. This wasn't just a transformation. This was ascension. And then, a small smile pulled at the corner of Gogeta's lips. He's with my son and Broly. He's with Brohan. His words were filled with relief. He didn't understand how it had happened, but he knew one thing. Piccolo was now their greatest ally. A few feet away, Raiko stood in silence. The battle between him and Gogeta had completely paused, but the divine warrior wasn't focused on his opponent anymore. His mind was racing. His instincts were screaming at him. This presence, this energy that had suddenly emerged into the cosmos. It felt familiar. Raiko narrowed his eyes, his expression unreadable. His body, clad in divine armor, shimmered with raw energy as he slowly exhaled. So many unexpected moments. More and more powerful beings keep emerging. His fingers flexed, his gaze locked onto the infinite horizon, trying to decipher the mystery before him. And then, a realization crept over him like a shadow. His brows furrowed as he spoke softly, as if trying to grasp a memory just beyond his reach. Why does this presence feel so familiar? It gnawed at him. The power, the essence, the way it moved through the fabric of reality. And then, like pieces of a puzzle snapping together, it clicked. The energy of Super Shenron. Zarama's energy. The very essence of the eternal dragons. And yet, it was something more. It was blended, merged, not just with dragon energy, but with something else entirely. A Namekian. Raiko's eyes widened. He finally understood. Piccolo had become something never seen before. A being who had taken the power of the eternal dragons and fused it with his own Namekian bloodline. Not just a god, a true deity among mortals. And at that moment, across space and time, every single Namekian across existence felt it. Across planet Namek, a strange phenomenon took hold. Every Namekian, no matter where they stood, felt it. A presence so overwhelming, so divine, that it called to them on a level beyond mortal comprehension. A single voice echoed in their minds, an instinctive truth that none of them could deny. A new god of the Namekians has been born. Gasps filled the air. Heads snapped to the heavens, their usually calm expressions replaced with shock and awe. It was as if the very sky itself had spoken to them. Then, without hesitation, without a second thought, every Namekian dropped to one knee. Even though they did not fully understand what had just happened, they knew. A hunch, a feeling deep within their souls. Their king had returned. From the highest cliffs of Namek, Elder Guru stood, his ancient eyes staring into the sky with reverence. His massive form trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. His voice, filled with both pride and disbelief, echoed across the land. "Piccolo," he murmured. "He has truly done it." The Namekians around him listened with rapt attention, their hearts pounding. "Somehow, he has found and fused with all the eternal dragons," Guru continued, his voice growing louder. "Something that should have been impossible, something that should have killed him." A silence stretched across the land. Then, Guru raised a weathered hand into the air and declared with absolute certainty, "Everyone, hear me now. Our king, King Piccolo, has now become our god. All hail God Piccolo." The response was immediate. A roar of voices erupted across Namek, the chant of millions shaking the very foundation of the planet. All hail God Piccolo. The words carried through the atmosphere, into space, and beyond. Even those who had never called Piccolo their leader, warriors, Namekian villagers, young and old alike, knew deep down that the fate of their race had changed forever. Among the gathered crowd, the remaining Z-warriors, the few still alive and stationed on Namek, watched in stunned silence. Bulma, usually quick with a remark, could only stare in awe, barely able to process what she had just heard. Her voice came out in a whisper. "God, Piccolo?" Even from across the universe, those who knew Piccolo felt the shift. The Namekian who had once stood in Goku's shadow, who had once been nothing more than a rival turned ally, had now become something far greater than any of them could have ever imagined. But as the weight of Piccolo's new power settled in, one thought lingered among them all. Would it be enough? Because if they failed now, it wouldn't just be their world that was lost. Everything in existence would be erased. The battlefield in the Null Realm trembled under the weight of Piccolo's presence. For the first time, Zarama, the first mortal, was not the center of attention. All eyes were now locked onto God Piccolo, the Namekian, who had transcended his mortal form. Across from him, Brohan stood firm, still burning with the power of Super Saiyan 6. His golden aura cracked and surged like a raging inferno, but even he had to acknowledge it. This Piccolo was different. The fused warrior smirked slightly, still wrapping his head around it all. "What should I call you?" Piccolo asked, his deep voice calm yet commanding. He could tell instantly that this was a fusion. The energy was familiar. He knew both warriors who made up this being. Brohan chuckled, shaking his head slightly as he lifted a glowing fist. "Call me Brohan," he replied confidently, a smirk forming on his face. And just like that, another warrior had joined the battle. Side by side, they stood. Super Saiyan Ultra Brohan, God Piccolo. The battle for existence was far from over, but now the tides had shifted. 24 hours earlier, one day before this legendary moment, Piccolo had set out on a journey. He had boarded one of Bulma's spacecrafts, prepared for the most dangerous mission of his life. Using Bulma's latest invention, the Universal Radar, he had tracked down the first set of Eternal Dragon Balls. His target? A planet at the far edge of the cosmos, Planet Cereal. Or rather, what was once Planet Cereal. After the Heaters, under Frieza's empire, had taken control of the world, they had sold the planet to the Shigarians. It had since been renamed Planet Shigarians, and it was here, on this distant world, that Piccolo would begin his transformation, the first step to becoming a god. And that's it for today's episode, guys. If you watched to the end, then that could be an indication that you enjoy the series. So please leave a like on the video. Thank you and take care.